Hi, I'm Chris from Airwindows, and I'm going to start doing a thing where I'm just checking in on Wednesdays to tell you what's going on and answer any questions if anybody has any. And it's not going to be for nearly as long as I used to because I'm still getting over the COVID and all that kind of stuff. So, here's the question. What is there to, good lordy, people already? Yikes. What is there to show off? Well, check it out. I am finding out where the silly camera sits. I can show you what's going on in W3. And I will. So here's what we've got so far. You'll notice I've got a new form of compression in here. And I should be able to show you what changes as we do that. For instance, here's a sine wave. Excuse me. Got this playing over my speakers. By the way, if you've got questions, fire them off because there's not as much time as before to answer any. I'll put it to live chat rather than top chat for that reason. So here's something that we can do. I've got span here, which I'm fairly used to using for checking these things out. And here we have doubly as it currently exists. And here's the new one. So as you can see, when you do this, we get a sound. And then if we do W2, W2 produces aliasing. You can't really see it that well. Aliasing means the harmonics bounce off the Nyquist frequency and show back up. These are things that are registering there. And they've got a lot to do with doubly, as you can see. Because we can distort, and even when we distort kind of a lot all by itself, we're not actually seeing aliasing. But the instant we start getting the doubly in there, we've got aliasing. And that's because doubly as it exists here, you'll also notice the decode doesn't really remove any of those things, is a transfer function, and it's a fairly sharp one. So it doesn't actually work like the hardware that the concept is modeled on. But that's not the only thing we can do. Here's W3. Oop, at volume 0, never mind. There we go. So, W2 as it exists into tape 7, W3. But there's more to it than just that. I'll also play like some noise and stuff. So check this out. With W2, You can't do all that much with it. But then when we switch in W3, it's actually, it's actually able to suppress the high frequencies a little more than W2 is able to do. And what ends up happening when we throw it at audio, like this bit that we have. Also, Elora, your suggestion of a shimmer reverb is not impossible, but it's not the first thing I'm working on. There's a number of ways to do. Shimmer is essentially do audio changes to the regen feedback as it comes back. So here we have a track that I've used for examples many times before. And W2. However, that is still with the earlier version of doubly that isn't actually using any compression constants or anything. That's not actually coffee. That is ginger tea with a little bit of stevia and a little bit of lemon lime Gatorade added to it. So, here's our W2. W3. So with the W2 here, this is what it sounds like distorting it. W3, on the other hand, this is what it sounds like distorting it. Also, you'll notice it's not throwing a lot of energy like way high up there either. And that's because it's using the encode and decode with this compression algorithm that fits in there. That's what's going to be going into the update for to tape. And we'll be doing some work on that. Let's get back to just a wave there. Also notice we can still do the things with the amounts. And let's see now. So with this one, we can do all encode and no decode. And if I fool with the frequencies, and I am making decisions around what to do with this frequency control. Oh, except for that is actually the wrong doubly I'm working with. So let's close that. This is the one I should be more interested in. So here's what the encode does. It's just that it is less aggressive because it's acting more like a compressor and less like a transfer function with the same ratio. In fact, this is something I've not tried before. This is something where it has the compression chasing the ULA encoded form. So that's more bright. And this becomes more dark. I'm going to have to stop before terribly long. I'm not entirely well yet, but and I can probably pull up another kind of sound. Here's another old favorite, Alien Kittens. So if you can hear how loud that hi-hat is. You should be able to make the highs louder this way, or less this way. Or do the obvious of make it darker. And when you do both of those things, we have the doubly effect, where it's boosting going in, and then I returned to the original arrangement, where it's doing the same thing, but backwards to decode it. Hey, Game Boy Z. Feeling more or less medium okay. Not absolutely fantastic, but I'm taking time to try to heal up, which is a challenge. I mean, that's not the easiest thing to do. Let's have a little fun here where see, I'm looking for where it says doubly amount. It appears to only add it here. So what I can do is replace. Then I can show you the raw output. And I can also comment out some of this other stuff. So that firstly, you're hearing only the output of this effect. So if I build this, now what you've got is I don't have any advice. No, make stuff. That's the advice. At least that's all I've ever done. So this should now become audible, doing a thing. So that is what's being added to the signal to do the doubly effect. And we can distort it, or we can not distort it. Now, one thing I was finding is as I am doing the compression, rather than being a sort of grating solid brightness noise, we have a compressy effect going on. And I can cross it over lower. However, when I cross it over this low, that's not very useful. And if I cross it over higher, it's being crossed over too high to be useful. So what I feel like is either the frequency selection is no longer doing anything useful, it needs to be a preset, or the range needs to be limited, and it would go up about this high, and it would go down about this high. And we've also got an inverted version of the same sound. Now, the reason that sounds the way that it does is because we're not actually combining it with the raw signal. And that's what you're supposed to do. So what it says here, input sample equals the end result of this. And we're making a high part, which is the filtered high-passed version. Then we're clamping that. And then we are also doing this to work out what the original doubly sound was, which was a U-law calculation. And then we're making the compression chase that. And it's actually chasing it using the same crossover frequency. The new version of Doubly 3 and the new version of 2Tape 8 will both be available in the Airwindows Consolidated plugin. And they will also have a output level, although Consolidated already does. But the new version will be stripping down some of these controls for the purpose of giving you the output level and so on. So, input sample plus equals high part times the compression times doubly amount. And you know, there's other ways I can do this, but one of the things about the original Dolby code is that when you cranked it up, it would clip high frequency transients. So let's see what we got here. Some of us are fairly familiar with what the sound of a literal Dolby encode sounds like, and we're not really there yet, but that's because this is in process and we're working on it. And I'm not going to be working on it all day long, but we'll tinker with it a little bit, get to another thing. If anybody has any other questions, then now's the time to ask them, because I can't be spending 8 hours a day while also recovering. And here is what that latest change just did. Now we hear the raw sound. And we've got distortions in here. And the highs can become brighter or darker. I can't tell you whether you can necessarily hear that very clearly, but there's a way that I can enhance it. See, comp enc here is how loud that brightness is as it's being added. So and we're adding all of these things with a doubly amount, which is more of a boost. We've got the boost turned up quite high. Basically, what I'm trying to do is make it so that it's all super bright. And then I'll show you what it's like when you use that and then invert it, because that's how the decode works, is you do the same thing, but then you subtract it. And I can probably show you what that does to a noise signal. We've already gone through and established that the new version is not creating nearly the aliasing that Doubly 2 did. But that's not the only thing that enters into it, because you wind up with the decode not being able to work properly because there's too much of it. And I'm trying to find the sort of happy medium between those things. And here we are again. Right. Also, interestingly, outpad isn't doing anything. So what we now have is a really quite incredibly bright and aggressive thing. So something went wrong, and it could have to do with this multiplication that we've just done. That was so aggressive that I'm really interested in what we might be able to do to ameliorate that a little bit. Or, see, here's the thing. Actually, I know exactly what happened. So here's your problem. This is what went wrong. Comp_enc is attempting to chase a value without quite exactly matching it. What it's doing is it's trying to chase the value of doubly. So it says comp_enc equals comp_x times 1 minus IIR_enc frequency plus doubly times IIR_enc frequency. What that does is if enc frequency is a really tiny number, it'll include a little bit of the new value coming in, meaning that it'll act like a compressor. It will react more slowly to new information coming in. And the information is an absolute version of the audio that we're working with. So what I've done by multiplying that by 2 is, yeah, that saved value that we're working with, every sample make that twice as loud. Just keep making it louder. And that's why it did what it did. So to fix that, we take that back out. Because it's a finely balanced thing. Now, do you see where you would put in that multiplied by 2 in order to get the intended result? You would put it in here, and then you'd still be using IIR_enc frequency, but this is essentially the same thing as our number doubly is being made larger than it originally was. It'll go to a larger number. And since comp_enc is chasing either that or the same value again, it should make the amount of brightness there twice as loud as it previously was, rather than infinitely loud because it's always constantly being turned up. Because doubly isn't always going to be the same thing. Doubly is what's being chased here. You could put an additional parenthesis in there, or you could just put it, if it says doubly divides and then doubly times 2 between these two lines, and that would work also. But what should happen here is that it should make a louder, brighter result without freaking out and going out of control. It's useful that it didn't actually crash the program even though it had gone out of control. But what we're looking for is something more like this. Where we can add brightness this way. Now, one thing about that is we're hearing spikes on the output of that. Also, we have a cancellation here. If I run this on noise, what should happen is the noise gets louder, like those hi-hats are getting louder. But then the high frequency should get quieter when we do this. And it does it to a point. But then those dynamic spikes keep peeking through again. And that's more gain normalization stuff. Like I can show you what that does on noise. Also, I do notice another question, and I'm going to do my level best to catch all questions that come through. Console X will not be the last lettered console, but Console X is the one that is both a console version with a bunch of controls and EQs and things all over it, like Console LA, Console MC, and so on, and also counts as one of the numbered consoles, which are the Chris invented ones rather than ones that are trying to copy something. So here we go. We have now got a noise blast and an encode amount that becomes larger when turned up past 0.5 and quieter when turned down to 0, because 0 is actually in the middle here. But what you're going to notice is that the cancellation effect that you need to do in order to make the doubly thing work properly won't work perfectly. We can boost it. We're boosting it lots. We can cut it, but it starts boosting again, and I'll tell you why. Because the amount that we can cancel out by adding it in inverse kind of neatly corresponds to this much. And then if we go much past that, you'll notice that the high frequency measurement goes back up again. And that's because we're adding a distorted sort of bright quality. And it's adding that distorted bright quality inversely. That's how the original Dolby boxes worked, is doing a compression, adding that brightness, but then adding it backwards, adding it inverted. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to look into clipping this even harder, because the doubly algorithm needs to work between 1 and -1. So we're doing what the original Dolby people did, which is hard clip the highs when they get too loud. In fact, we can take out this amount because clearly we don't need that much of it. And we can also dial that back a little bit. And we're going to try to find a setting where it is going to cancel out when reduced, but boosts a lot when you boost. I'm looking to have the most extreme result there. And what happens when we cancel out, what happens when we subtract it instead of adding it, is that when it becomes too loud, it starts adding high frequencies in again. So we're going to try it on the noise again, and we're going to see if, because what we've done here is we've taken the high frequency section, and that's using the IIR filter to do it. VCV should be updated, yes. If VCV is not updated, that's a concern. Note that the official VCV release lags behind plugins to some extent. Like if you want the very most recent one, you have to do the dailies. And it should work. There should be a downloadable VCV plugin that has everything that the current version of Airwindows Consolidated has in, because it's being built in the same way, right? So now let's see what we got here, because now we're starting with high part, which is the filtered version, but rather than multiplying by 2, we're multiplying by 4. We're just making it a very aggressively clipped. We're turning it up going into the U-law section. And the U-law section is this algorithm here. Kind of simplified everything down quite a bit. So, and we've canceled out some of this other stuff. So we'll build that again, and then we'll have another look at the noise stuff again. And if we can get a more aggressive version of this, we'll listen to it on audio of some kind. See if we got it to sound closer to what you get when you run a Dolby encode without the decode. Here's our noise again. I'm going to run the W3 here so that we can see what it does. So we can boost. That's a big boost. Here's the filter. And now we start to cut, and we very quickly get the boost back again. And that seems to be about the maximum amount of cut we can do. And that's the kind of slopes we can produce with this frequency thing. I'm considering the idea of setting it up so that it just has an amount and a frequency control, and they're both set sort of inversely, so you can nudge them in opposite directions from each other. Because the only real effectiveness of that is fooling around with them, making them like fight each other or not. Dark, bright. Dark, bright. So the next thing we'll do is go to a times 4 minus 2, or maybe even like that's not making much of a change, and I noticed that it did quite a lot. What we want to do is see whether doing this in this way can set it up so that the cut, the roll-off, the high-frequency remover goes to its most extreme setting when turned all the way down to 0, because that's going to equate to the same thing as if you had the what we're calling outly amount and set it up for that to be doubled power. By the way, I gotta swear by the ginger tea with a little lemon lime Gatorade. It's delicious. Anyways, it's probably only delicious if I'm not well, so I'll keep an eye out for when it starts to seem disgusting. And when it starts to seem disgusting, I'll know that I'm on the road to recovery. Here we are with noise again. Same deal. Effect stack. Boost. Cut. So this is kind of hiding the controls a little bit. That is 30, minus 30. And that is minus 48. So we're getting about 18 dB of action here. If these cancel each other out properly, that's 9 dB of noise reduction. There's our boost. There's our cut. It's doing a pretty good job of dialing the encode frequency right down to nothing and still doing something with it. If I turned it to full boost, so that makes me fairly happy because it's behaving relatively normally on all of these different settings. So you know the next thing to do is throw actual music of a sort at it. So we're going to throw my rock track at it. So that's supposed to be dark. And that's supposed to be bright. And also note here that this is not the same thing at all as W2, because W2 would let you push this hard. And this is what it sounds like with W2. That's why it's aliasing. Whereas with this one, this is what that sounds like. So we go from this to this. It's actually quite loud. Oh wait, I know what happened. So we go from this to this. And then if we're canceling everything out, what canceling everything out sounds like, actually I don't have it set up for W2. Or wait, no, do I? Yes, I think I do. So what the canceling everything out condition sounds like is this. So that's supposed to be making stuff darker. But this is what the canceling everything out sounds like with the new doubly. Goes from this. This is what the current one sounds like. This is what the new one sounds like. We can change the frequency. That's supposed to be high frequencies getting canceled out. So basically the way that works is this is going to be more able to not only do the doubly decode and cut out highs, but it's also going to be more capable of cutting out unwanted clipping factors. Because one of the things that Dolby does is harmonics count as noise for it. So we're going from a current thing which sounds fine to people. People are enjoying some of the sounds of it, but it's this. That is the cutting stuff. This is supposed to be dark. This is dark. So what we can probably do is, oh, thanks, Obergon. What we can probably do is fire this up just as it is and dial back some of the changes. We only need this to go to 1. And we're only going to need outly to go to what will be -1, if I have this calculated correctly anyhow. And the reason is that we've made a little change in here. So firstly, let's put back the clipping factor. And then let's put back what we have here. And now let's scope this out and see what has visibly changed in this code. High part. High part needs to be ×4, not simply ×2. That's the difference that happened. The rest of this, not actually any different that I can see. So what we should be able to do is replicate some of that stuff, first with noise and then with the audio. And then fire up the tape drive section and hear to some extent what this is meant to sound like. There will be fewer parameters, but there will be an output level. In fact, I'm going to be renaming. I have to find that elsewhere. So this is what the things are named at the moment, but it's going to need to change. Because rather than tape drive, people apparently didn't understand that tape drive was effectively input gain. So I'm going to need to call it input gain. And the parameters are going to be reduced. I can't have dedicated amount and frequency for each. And, for doubly I can. It's just going to have to cut back when I bring it over to tape 8 so that there can be room for a output level. Yep. Again, bear in mind, VCV Rack, the official downloadable version that you get from updating, doesn't include the newest versions until Bacon Paul makes a dedicated release for that. So in order to run the very latest builds, you have to be able to install a dedicated build. And I'm not there with you as far as being able to help you do that right now. I have not worked with VCV Rack recently enough to be able to do that. I'm going to have to stop before terribly long. We're hanging in there for a little bit longer. Just a little bit longer, so that should work. That should work. Our high part is being driven harder. The rest of this is the same. So that ought to basically do it. So the next thing we do is run some of this noise and see if we can make it do both of the things. There's two things it's supposed to be able to do. And here it is. Encode amount and decode amount can go down to nothing. Outpad needs to be turned up. We have noise. So we should be able to boost highs like this. And we should be able to cut them. Lovely. Like this. And then if we boost again, now what we've got is boost and cut were the same amount. Boost, then cut. And that should work. So, having determined that now we have these amounts working properly, I'll probably leave these controls the same. People might want to just fool with things with more flexibility over them. But yeah, I'm going to have to redesign to tape 8 so that I can fit in that output level, because I can't have all these controls onto tape 8 anymore. And here's our rock song. And here's our boost and cut. Boost, cut. And then the frequency should be able to go, and I might just leave that the same. Okay, I'm fairly happy with what's happening, because what's going on at the moment is we've got the doubly amounts set to the appropriate thing. I am wondering whether I can alter the tone of it by shifting the frequencies against each other. Because if I set them both lower, the crossovers for both of those go lower and they match. But then, if the crossovers shift opposite directions, it's going to do stuff with the mid-range, and let's see what that is. It should go darker if the encode is higher, and it should go brighter if the decode is higher. Okay, I'm enjoying this. Okay, that's much brighter. That's much darker. That's matched. So what would happen if we just had the one frequency control, but it operated backwards? That's going to work like this. We're going to move this to next to the other one. And then we're going to set it to the same control. So the decode frequency is the same control, and they will tend to, like, the control goes from 0 to 1 no matter what. And the divide equals overall scale means it's forced to, I'm going to have to test this against some of the different sample rates. Before, I didn't think that was necessary either, but people got upset about it. Also, this is going to be a lot friendlier as far as being able to slam stuff into it. I should probably put additional gain on tap as well, like so if the drive section works like this, then it'll go from 0 up to 4, and that's going to give me more gain on tap. And doubly amount and outly amount are both, let's fool with this too. I want to see whether I can make this work. So see what I've done here? These are now all the same. These are now all the same. The amount is the same. The frequency is the same. It's one of them is scaled by overall scale. But here's the thing. Oh, and outly amount needs to be negative. But here's the thing. What if the center position was 1 and -1? Well, we'll start with this, right? We'll start with, let's scale both of these. So that the parameter is able to push it to 1 at the middle of the setting, or -1 at the middle of the setting. But then what we want to do is flip this up a little bit and see what happens when we start doing this. So outly amount is now backwards from inly amount. So if you increase that more, what's going to happen is the highs get boosted even more and the lows start getting cut. Or as you pull it back, the lows, although one concern I have there is that we can't boost the lows more than that, and I'll tell you why. It's because the if I do this, that will clamp the decode to a setting that continues to turn the highs down. Otherwise, it's going to boost even more and get to where it starts brightening things again. And that's not what we're going to want if we move it the other direction. And the way that works is that if we have it exactly halfway, they're both set to 1. We start cranking doubly amount, that's cranking the brightness and cutting back the darkening effect. However, if we pull it back, we're not adding more brightness, we're turning down the amount of brightness that's being added. But we can't simply continue turning up the darkening effect because it's already maxed out. So it needs to be clamped to 1 point, well, actually it's going to be -1, isn't it? I stand corrected. That has to be clamped to -1, or it'll stop turning down the brightness anymore. It'll start going the wrong way. And similarly with this, the decode frequency has to be inverted. But the rest of it should be good. So now let's see what happened. And in deference to people who were being all mean and sarcastic at me about how I just winged it and improvised stuff, which there's a lot of truth to that, we're going to try the noise section and see what it does when we do this. One thing about it, it's probably going to honor the brightness correctly, although I seem to have killed the audio. Bright, dark, good. The difference is now we're using both of them at once. So we can turn the brightness amount down or up. But we can also move the frequencies against each other. Maybe we want to invert the settings. It sounds like when I take the frequencies, it's making it go a lot darker compared to brighter this way. What that means is I've got my frequencies inverted. And that means I did it backwards. And it's the encode frequency that should be dropping as we boost, because if the encode frequency drops, it's letting through more of this boosty high frequency stuff, letting there be more high frequencies, and then the decode frequency is restricting it to only the higher frequencies, and that's having its effect as well. So in doing this, we've now got it sort of designed as a kind of pre-calibrated arrangement, and we have cut the number of controls we need in half. And we're still using the original doubly topology of doing our high frequency reduction by doing another high frequency compression and then subtracting it rather than adding it, which is how Dolby was done back in the day. Effect stack, doubly 3, our pad. So for amount and frequency, this now means 50-50 setting is balanced. That's brighter and that's darker. And the frequency, setting the frequencies against each other does a different, separate thing. But it acts like a sort of mid-range hype or a kind of mid-range restriction. See, it's not really the highs, it's kind of the grading upper mids that we're fooling with here. And this is independent of what we do with the amount setting, where we can have it brighter or darker. And then if we do that on audio, yeah, bear with me. I got a few more minutes of hacking to work here, and then we're going to be done. If we do it in audio, it balances out like this. Oh. Excuse me. Full blast. voicing. Brighten. Darken. And that's with the additional super huge amount of boost I have in there. Actually, why is tape drive not cutting off? That seems weird. What's going on? Is tape drive not cutting off because it should be? Huh. Do I have another factor in here? Oh, that's why. I've only got, it's not actually working as an attenuator. I'm going to want to change that. So let's quickly rebuild this. So there's our distortion stuff in here. We do the doubly encode. We do the tape drive. I wonder if I can rename all of these. Can we edit all in scope? I bet we can. Let's edit all in scope here too. There we are. And there's going to be some removing of controls in here, but this is clearly going in the right direction. I'm thinking this is what you're going to see probably in a couple of weeks into tape 8. Big enough of an enhancement. So now input sample gets to attenuate as well as boost. Before it was not attenuating because I told it not to. And the thing with the guitars being crunchy is particularly handy because I would like to also be able to use this as a part of 2Tape that you can process things like tracked guitars into filtering, and that into 2Tape 8, and that back into like Console X, for instance. There's stuff that you can do with pre-emphasis and de-emphasis that works real good on some of these sounds. But to get back to this, tape drive is now at 0, and now it does work as an attenuator. And 0.5 seems to be about unity gain, but we can do more than that. Brighter. Darker. Probably too dark. And here's where that crunch factor comes in. So that's kind of cool. So what's happening here is we've disabled 2 of the controls and bundled them with the first 2 controls. So all of this still works as 0.5 is your default, except for not outpad. If I did that, I would have to make outpad also work as a boost, which maybe is an okay idea. But the difference is we can fool with balancing the encode and decode against each other volume-wise. See, now it's brighter. And now it's all brightness. And if we set it to all darkness, it does actually go to a darkening effect. But then, this is the one that gets really funky. I wonder whether I need to be restricting this. Well, I'll tell you one thing I clearly need to do is we're going to have to test that. So we can balance the doublies against each other. But the thing that I need to test out here now is I got to start running versions of Alien Kittens at different sample rates on this. And that will be the end of my check-in day, but not chicken day, although technically I am having chicken thigh stir-fry stuff for dinner tonight, so I guess it is chicken day rather than taco day. But here's the thing, I need to see whether this acts the same. So the encode and decode amount shouldn't really act any differently. But frequency, on the other hand, this is going to start acting differently. Ah, interesting. So I can make it kind of fart out here. The question is, will it do the same thing at other sample rates? Because it's supposed to be able to do the same thing at other sample rates. Let's find out. We can go kind of punchy, and it farts out here. $96K. After that, 192. So this should work about the same. Yeah, it farts out about the same way, I think. $192K. Now let's see if it still farts out in the same place, because it's supposed to fart out in a particular place. Takes really long to load because this is the initial development is done on a retro computer, so that these things can work on all manner of computers all over the place. At least that's the hope. W3, off we go. Again, we can drive it pretty hard. It gets a sort of mid-range punchy here. And that is absolutely farting out at the same way that the lower sample rate one was doing. I think I got there. I think that worked. And lastly, I'm going to run some other random thing. Oh, I know. Let's run a straight up guitar tone in here. Oh, except for I can't do it immediately because I'm not sure. Well, maybe this is. It can. My two tapes are stereo plugins, and so I would need to change it to stereo for that. Let's see now. So here's the thing, like voicing this stuff can make it so that the distortion hits the tape differently. That does actually sound fairly similar to running an overly hot guitar into tape without any real conditioning or modifying it. We'll fool with the encode mount, I think, a little bit. Yeah, it's taken a lot of the real bright highs out of there. I just have to attenuate it a little bit, and then it's just fine. Or I do still have a dry wet, so. So there's our dry, and this is what we can do with it. You can definitely do a lot with that frequency adjustment, that's for damn sure. Alrighty. I've got a few adjustments to make, like removing some of the unused things, but I see no reason you can't have W3 this coming weekend. I'll see whether I can't make that happen for you. Now I'm going to go off and make my dinner and get more sleep. And I'll talk to you folks later. Bye-bye.